conversations I had with Huey, you know. So my point becomes, he was trying to absolutize himself.
We had felt that all the contradictions that was happening between David Hilliard and all the other people in the party, and the central leadership and the breakdown in centralism and all of that, would be resolved when Huey came home.
When Huey came out, Geronimo remained a member of the Central Committee.
For whatever reason, Huey, after he got out of jail, he wanted to have the total control of the party, but the way the party was set up with the Central Committee, that was impossible. Geronimo, being one of the strongest personalities on the Central Committee, just had to be eliminated.
It was around this time that Elmer Geronimo Pratt was captured and branded as a agent by David Hilliard and the Central Committee of the Black Panther Party on the West Coast. Of course, this was a total fabrication. Geronimo was not an agent. In fact, the individual who pointed the finger at Geronimo and declared him an agent, Melvin Cotton Smith, was himself a police informer, an agent, who was assigned to Geronimo by David Hilliard.
A split apparently has opened in the leadership of the Black Panther Party. On a San Francisco television talk show, Huey Newton, in the studio, talked with fugitive Eldridge Cleaver, speaking by telephone from Algeria. Cleaver said a purge of Black Panther members is tearing the party apart, blamed it on David Hilliard, and demanded the ouster of Hilliard as Panther Chief of Staff.
Many of those confrontations, both on the West Coast and between the East Coast and the West Coast, happened because of the COINTELPRO program, what they called Program Brown Mail. They would write to one person and sign their letter. They would write to another person and sign each other's person's signature.
And it really cracked the Black Panther Party in two by creating two factions.
All of this was happening at the same time that Huey Newton was planning his itinerary to come back east, and the government used the hysteria and the paranoia around these issues to give Huey the impression that the New York Panthers were unloyal to him.
They wrote to people in my name, signed my signature, and these were crazy letters that were written by the FBI. And Jeff Fort got a letter from Chairman Fred. Of course, they thought those letters were from each other. And the tone of the letters were incendiary. Or you're a punk. If I see you, I'm going to, shoot you. You're a coward. If you had guts, you would come down here. I mean, it was literally an attempt by this government to incite violence.
COINTELPRO was the whole cause of the split between the different faction in the party that caused the death of Sam Napier.
In terms of the actual physical integrity and well-being of the Panther, Sam Napier might have been the most important person. The newspaper was the most important entity and tool, an institution that the Panthers had. And he was in charge of the paper.
The loss of Sam Napier wasn't just the loss of a person who was a paper salesman. It was like a spirit in the party, a strong, positive spirit that permeated the whole party. You lost like a friend, a brother.
Robert Webb was the ranking Panther in the entire East Coast. He had the rank of Field Marshal, which was a Central Committee position. It was an underground secret rank.
The police knew who these people were. The police knew that they had orchestrated this conflict. And they gloated over it in their documents when they said that they could take credit for the murder, for Robert Webb's murder, and that they can take credit for the irreconcilable differences in splitting the Black Panther Party. When Huey Newton came to the Northeast, we in New York were responsible for his security. The government knew this through their agents and through the mail. They sent threats, death threats to Huey Newton, purportedly coming from us on the East Coast, saying that, we were faithful to Eldridge Cleaver and that when Huey came back east, we were going to kill him. And it was up at Yale University that Huey Newton sort of got extremely paranoid. I was told that I was suspended from the Black Panther Party for threatening his life.
So life is very tough, and a funny thing happened to all of us on the way to the grave. Huh?
Huey, David sent me underground with Geronimo, but with no intentions of us being successful, but with the intentions of us eventually being killed. I think their plan was that we would be killed by the police. We would then become martyrs. They would be able to raise us as martyrs and go on with their own program. I followed orders, did what I was supposed to. Geronimo followed orders, did what he was supposed to. And then we end up being in the middle of the split between the Black Panther Party, and they use that as a reason to expel us and to break with Eldridge.
And at the same time that this was going on, the Panther 21 in prison were contemplating writing an open letter criticizing the leadership of the Black Panther Party around various issues.
It was only two things that could happen, that we could either spend the rest of, go to prison or the cemetery. And knowing that people like Twyman Myers and Robert Webb and Sam Napier, Fred Bennett, and Fred Hampton had made the ultimate sacrifices, that meant that we could either back up and give up and let them win, or we could struggle against it. On one end, we had the Huey people who were out to do us in, and on the other side, we had the government who was out to kill us. So we were in between the rock and the hard place.
Out of that came the birth of the underground, the Black Liberation Army, the armed wing of the Black Panther Party, whose stated purpose was to start and initiate an offensive military campaign against the forces of reaction.
BLA came into being when those who did political work above ground, when they were more or less from the repressive forces, was forced underground because of their political work in the community. Then they became part of BLA.
So basically it was taking the war to the enemy instead of waiting the enemy to bring the war to you. And that's what the Black Liberation Army was about.
The public at large has a hard time understanding how often innocent people are wrongly convicted.
The Los Angeles Police Department, the DA's office, and the FBI were determined that Pratt should stay behind bars. And so they tried to find some other case to bring against him. And they finally decided on an unsolved murder case called the tennis court murder that came out of Santa Monica, and charged him with this on the basis of some shenanigans involving FBI informant named Julio Butler.
Julius Butler said at Pratt's trial he was not an FBI informant. We have a ton of material that clearly indicate that Butler was an FBI informant. As an example, here we have an FBI Federal Bureau of Investigation, August 19th, 1969, and all the information he was giving the FBI during that interview.
Of course, the FBI is going to place itself in a position of being able to deny whatever happens, just the way they're denying that Julius Butler was an informant.
Butler said that he has written a letter containing information relating to an involvement of BP members in an affair that could put them in a gas chamber.
I mean, they had an informant file, and Butler was contacted about 36 times, but they said, well, he's not an informant.
Butler said that he was expelled from the BPP in August of 1969. At Pratt's trial, he said he was not expelled, that he quit.
Now, according to FBI's own records, their own telephone tap, they later realized that Geronimo Pratt was in Oakland at the time of the tennis court murder.
The ballistics person came in and testified that the bullet taken from the victim did not match ballistically the barrel of the gun. Well, the way they got around that was they had Julius Butler, as part of his confession, tell the jury that not only did Pratt confess the crime to me, that he did it, but he also told me that he threw the barrel of the gun away. So that took care of that.
The counterintelligence program had successfully divided the Black Panther Party into two opposing groups, and the Newton group had barred any members of its group from having anything to do, speaking on the phone, talking to, and definitely not testifying in trial of the other group. Geronimo Pratt had been expelled. He was in the other group. And so almost